Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over my Mythic and Masterpiece card chase list for the upcoming set Wilds of Eldraine. So, let's get into it. I'm going to start with the Masterpieces, and the Masterpieces are really in two tiers. We've got the tier which is just a singular card, that is the chase card for the set in terms of Masterpieces, and then the other ones are either enablers for mechanics in the set or seem like cards that could be really good with other cards and might wind up becoming really important chase cards. But just at a first glance, this is my gut take on the Masterpieces. So the first card on the list, Guillaume Masterchef, is one of those cards that's not like necessarily a must-have, but I could see it being incredibly powerful in the current standard. So Guillaume Masterchef is 10 for a 5/3. It's legendary and has trample. It's a troll warlock. It's both black and green, and reads, when a creature enters the battlefield under your control, create 2 food tokens. Then when any player, matches a food support gem, a random creature you control that doesn't have prevent damage is going to gain both prevent damage and reach until end of turn. So that means that if you match a food support gem on your turn, one of your critters will get prevent damage and reach until the end of your turn, but that also means that it won't have it for your opponent's turn when your opponent is attacking you. And then for your opponent's turn, it means if your opponent destroys one of the food tokens, that one of your creatures is going to get prevent damage and reach. And reach makes it so that the critter will block anything that has flying or doesn't have flying. So it'll block absolutely everything, which is really, really great, especially in conjunction with prevent damage. And then if you factor in a deck that's really built around Guillaume, that's going to get a whole bunch of those food tokens out, then there's going to be a lot of those support tokens down. And Greg, the AI, tends to try and match your support gems. So it's, I think, fairly likely if you've got a deck up and running with Guillaume down, that Greg is going to match those food support gem tokens quite often, meaning that you will often find that you have prevent damage and reach creatures on your side of the battlefield, which is a very useful effect. But beyond that, there just are a lot of cards that really synergize with sacrificing supports or tokens, or at the very least, that really seem like they'll make a lot out of these food tokens. And so in another video, I'm going to be going over like really cool card interactions in the set, and one of them will be the food card interactions. But Guillaume is a card that I'm really looking forward to because I think it's going to have a lot of play with the new set. There we go. The second card on the list is Hellhole Rats. This card is like really, really intriguing to me. This is in the same category as Guillaume, where it's one where I think that there's a lot of the cards in the set that are going to really make this card very powerful. On its own, it's not necessarily like a super powerful card, but with other cards, I think is going to be pretty incredible. So this is a 2/2 rat for 6. It's both red and black. It has haste, and it has the effect when a rat enters the battlefield under your control, your opponent discards the last card that can be discarded from their hand. That means any card, so long as it doesn't read, this card can't be discarded. And if they can't discard a card, then you're going to destroy the top card of your opponent's library and deal X damage to your opponent's planeswalker, where X is half of the mana cost of the last card in your opponent's graveyard rounded up. So basically, you're going to, if you get a whole bunch of rats down, then you're going to wipe your opponent's hand, and then you're going to wind up killing your opponent if you make a ton of rats by killing them with the mill. So I find that the average like mana cost card in a deck in Puzzle Quest is somewhere between 13 and 15, depending on the deck. And so I would say that you're going to be looking at about 7 damage, roughly, on average, for each of those cards that you're going to be milling from your opponent. So let's say that you find a way to produce 10 rat tokens in a turn, right? Then you're going to be milling your opponent and hitting them for about 70 damage. And then that doesn't include all the damage that the rats themselves are going to do. So there happen to be some other interactions that will enable you to get a far more than that in terms of rat tokens in a turn. So I think that this could be a really cool card. I don't know that this is going to be like an event card that you need to have, but it definitely looks really cool. And so I've got my eye on it, and I really want to get it and make a video out of it. Like Guillaume, this is another card that's going to be in my like fun card interactions video as well. The third masterpiece is the chase masterpiece, in my opinion, in the set. It's Una, Queen of the Fae. Una, Queen of the Fae is 10 mana for a 5/5 flying, and it is legendary. It is both blue and black, and has when you make a blue or black match by swap, exile the top 5 cards of your opponent's library. Then you're going to create a fairy token for each color among cards in your opponent's exile, and you're going to gain mana equal to the number of cards in your opponent's exile. So if you're playing it in a blue deck, there's a lot of different ways in blue that you can get extra matches. There's especially ways from Puzzle Masters where you can get extra matches, things like Time Walk and stuff like that. And so you could wind up making multiple of these blue matches or black matches by swap in a turn. And then the thing that's really stands out to me about Una, well, actually there's a lot of things, but there's really 2 things that stand out to me about Una. And the first one is that you are going to be gaining ridiculous amounts of mana, right? I mean, you're going to be getting at least 5 mana from the first blue or black match you make to cards in your hand, right? And then you're going to wind up every single time you make one of those matches, you're going to be increasing the power of that ability, which means that even if your opponent destroys an Una, you're just going to be able to cast another one at some point in the game, and it's going to build off of the work that the previous Una did as well. With that said, there's also a lot of black planeswalkers that exile cards from players' libraries, and so I really just see this snowballing into a sort of out-of-control thing where Una's going to be able to make it so that you just get full mana to all the cards in your hand every single turn. So strikes me kind of like Tamiyo, except a lot easier for when this thing comes down. Tamiyo the Vanguard, excuse me. But when it comes down to just reset a lot more easily if it gets destroyed. Creating the fairy token for each color amongst cards in your opponent's exile is like so-so. It's a maximum of 5. It means if your opponent's playing a Meeting of the 5 deck, you very well may wind up getting 5 of those fairy tokens every time. But I'm going to guess that those fairy tokens are going to be 1/1 flyers, so not super powerful, but the mana gain definitely is. And so this just seems like a really, really good card to use. Next card on my list is Serra's Sanctum. This is a 9 mana support land, and reads, at the beginning of your turn, convert X gems to white, where X is 2 plus the number of enchantments you control, including their reinforcements. If you don't control an enchantment card, target creature you control gains Royal Roll. When an enchantment card enters play under your control, this support gains a shield. So this one strikes me really as like a fairly powerful gem converter card, because it's automatically going to be generating 2 gems. But if it's generating just the 2, it's going to immediately make an enchantment card. That Royal Roll is an enchantment it's an aura enchantment that's going to be buffing one of your creatures. And so that means it's then going to be converting 3. And then there's just a lot of cards in the set, especially in white and green, that are going to give you a whole bunch of enchantments out. And then if we wind up seeing in one of the future sets where they're going back to, I think, like the Nyx world, right? The God world where there's like enchantment creatures, this will definitely play off of that as well. And so since this is just converting every single turn, it's basically a near guarantee to convert 3 per turn. And then it's going to wind up converting more than that as you go if you wind up building a deck around enchantments. Beyond that, it winds up giving itself more shields, which is going to make it harder for your opponent to get rid of, or it's going to be harder for it to kill itself as well. And then the last thing that I really like about it is you'll notice that this card is colorless. It's not white, so it's not necessarily going to land on a white gem, which means it's going to be harder for it to destroy itself as well. So there's just a lot of things going for this. I really like gem conversion, and so this card stands out to me as being a fairly good staple card that you can throw into just about any white deck. The next masterpiece is going to be the Shatter Gang Brothers. I love goblins. That is a not very well kept secret. And this card is going to pair really disgustingly with Guillaume. So this is a 13 mana 3/3. It has bargain, so you can sacrifice a support when you play this in order to get the bonus ability, which is going to create 2 food tokens and destroy 10 gems of your opponent's planeswalker colors. Furthermore, when a card you control is destroyed during your turn, destroy an opposing card at random. So we haven't gotten to see this card play yet. However, I'm going to imagine that this is going to enter the battlefield, then you bargain, and so that bargain, when you do that and destroy a support, is just going to immediately destroy an opposing card at random. And then you're going to create the 2 food tokens and destroy 10 gems of your opponent's planeswalker colors. Destroying those gems very well might wind up destroying more food tokens. If it does, it's just going to help you completely wipe your opponent's board state. And then on top of that, it's also going to be giving you a whole bunch of mana by destroying gems and ideally giving you mana. Destroying 10 gems is pretty significant. Destroying them of your opponent's planeswalker colors can be pretty devastating for them as well, because it just means that they're not going to have very much to match for themselves to get like more mana. And so just all in all, this seems like a really powerful card. It's a 3-color card, which is really nice because that means you can use it with something like Meeting of the Five. Every time you cast a Meeting of the Five, you're going to get another copy of Shatter Gang Brothers. And so this could serve as just incredible removal for a food token based deck. And food tokens just seem to be pretty nifty in the set. And even without the food tokens, honestly, if you're able to bargain this thing, this just seems like a very solid value card for removal and mana. So really, really cool card. Tajic, Blade of the Legion, is I think the last of my masterpieces. This is a 12 mana 2/2. It takes advantage of the new mechanic Celebration, which means that if 2 cards enter the battlefield on your turn, or if you play 2 cards, really, then the Celebration effect is going to take place. But the real key here is that it's a 2/2 with Prevent Damage that has a way of giving itself Vigilance. So if you've wound up playing against something like Phyrexian Vindicator, or just really any of the cards that have a way of blocking and having Prevent Damage, it can be pretty frustrating to go up against. It's a very strong mechanic pairing. Like the other cards in this list, it's sort of in a 1B sort of classification, right? It's better than like all the other masterpieces that aren't on the list, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be as good as Una. This one here has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you're going to create a Knight token and give it haste. That Knight token is going to be a 2/2, I'm guessing, because all Knight tokens in this game are 2/2s, I feel like. And then it has, when this creature attacks, Celebration. So if 2 cards have been played or enter the battlefield, keep in mind, this Knight is going to be one of them. So that really just means you're going to get this every time you play a card on your turn. You're going to get this. This creature is going to get +5/+5 and Vigilance until the beginning of your next turn. So it's going to go from a 2/2 to a 7/7. And that's going to be pretty easy to accomplish because you just need to play 1 card, assuming you're going to let the Knight token go down. So definitely a very solid value card. It's, once again, not like an essential, like ultra great card. It's just not going to kill your opponent immediately type of thing, but it's still just a very solidly good card that you can throw into pretty much any white or red deck and get value out of it. So that's it for the masterpieces. For the mythics that I've established as chase cards, a lot of them are going to be the double-sided cards, so we'll take a look at both sides of the card. Not all of them have 2 sides that I think are necessarily worth playing, but you still get that extra utility of having the second side, and it's good to know just everything that the card does. I'll once again let you know if it's sort of like a 1A or a 1B sort of card, like if it's a card that you absolutely need to target, or if it's a card that is just more one that could be good if you wind up pulling it to try to make a deck out of. So the first of those cards is Agatha of the Vile Cauldron. This is 11 for a 1/1, and it has, when you match an activated gem, convert X gems to red or green, where X is this creature's power. This effect can trigger up to 3 times per turn. Then she's able to activate 4 gems on her own, 2 to red, 2 to green. The red gems are going to make it so that creatures in your hand and creatures you control get +1/+1 and haste until end of turn, which is pretty sweet because you're going to make your match, you're potentially going to you're going to trigger those activated gems, and then you're going to get mana, and the creatures that you'd give that mana to are going to get haste, so whether or not they have haste, they're going to come down and be able to swing right away. And then the activated green gems are going to make it so that creatures in your hand and creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. So she doesn't strike me as an overpowered card. You definitely are going to want to find a way to power her up because 1/1 is pretty weak. And converting X gems being 1 is not going to be a whole lot. However, her activate abilities are going to power her up, meaning that if you get multiple gem triggers in the same turn, then the conversions are going to sort of get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's just a lot of cards, or even a few planeswalkers, that I feel like are going to really go well with this planeswalker. I'm thinking of, for example, Puzzle Master Chandra, who is going to be able to activate 4 gems with her first ability, and then when an activated gem is triggered, you wind up getting to fetch a spell from your library. So if you find some way of powering her up even just a little bit, you're going to get a ton of value out of her. She's a 1B card. She's not like a card that you absolutely have to have. It's not like she's going to make every single deck you put her in better. But she, at the very least, seems like she could be a very valuable and very powerful card in the right deck. The second card is going to be one of those double-sided cards. You can see that it has Adventure here on the left, meaning it's got 2 sides. This is Baluna Grand Squall. It's 13 for a 4/4. It's a legendary. It's got Trample. It's got 3 colors, which is just always good to know in case this becomes a Meeting of the Five target. And it has at the beginning of your turn, reduce the cost of each adventure card in your hand by X until the beginning of your next turn, where X is 3 plus this creature's reinforcements. So adventure doesn't seem like it's super powerful in this set, but we know that there's going to be cards with adventure in the next set as well. And so it could wind up being that this card is very, very powerful because of, the cost reduction. Cost reduction in card games is always a really powerful mechanic. This one being 3 plus the reinforcements means that you're just guaranteed to reduce the cost of all adventures by 3 at the minimum every single turn, which is definitely useful. And so this is another one of those 1B cards where it could wind up being good, but it could wind up being not as great. The flip side of this card, Seek Thrills, we don't know the mana cost quite yet. I'm sure that we'll know it soon. But it reads, destroy the top 6 cards of your library, then return the last 3 cards with adventure from your graveyard to your hand, and give those cards mana equal to the number of adventure cards in your graveyard. So the spell card on this one actually looks pretty decent, especially if it's a low cost. Destroying cards from your library could wind up being really useful in a bunch of different decks. We've got a new Wrenn in green Planeswalker that is going to want things in the graveyard. So you could use this even just to destroy things and then get more copies of itself to just continually destroy cards from your deck, which could be pretty solid, and then give them mana as well, which is also really, really solid. And then, if you wind up playing the Baluna, then the Seek Thrills will get cheaper as you get more of them as well. So there seems to be some interesting things you can do with this card. I'm definitely intrigued to check it out and see if it winds up being really strong or if it just winds up being mediocre. This one's definitely going to require that you have more cards from the set, though, before you really get a good idea for if it's going to be good or bad. Next card on my list is Beseech the Mirror. This is going to be one of the new bargain cards. It's 13 mana, and you're going to pick one of the first 4 cards from your library and fetch it, and give it half of its mana. If you bargain, so if you sacrifice a support card, then instead that card that you fetch is going to get full mana. So this card is really, really nice because fetch is always really good. Being able to control what you draw means that you're going to get to the cards that you need a little bit faster. I know that a lot of players play combo decks, or they've got a specific card that they're looking for as a win condition, or maybe you need to get a removal card in a pinch. And this card is not only going to help you fetch it, but it's also going to give it mana. And between the half mana, which is already solid, and the option to bargain to get full mana, I think that this is definitely going to be a card that you can throw into a lot of black decks and get a lot of value out of. It's once again going to be like a 1B sort of card. I think that 13 mana for this ability is a bit expensive. If this was more like 6 or 7, like something that you could reasonably get in one match, then that would make it a lot better. But nonetheless, the utility of the fetch with mana is definitely worth keeping an eye on. Next card on the list, Blossoming Tortois, or as I like to call them, Tortois, is one of the cards that I am personally looking forward to the most. So this is an 11 mana 3/3. It is a turtle. And I just want to stop for just a moment because it drives me crazy that this card is called Blossoming Tortois and it is a creature turtle. This should be a creature tortoise, not a creature turtle. But anyways, that's just me being a stubborn git. So when this creature enters the battlefield or attacks, destroy the top 4 cards of your library and then return the last creature or support card from your graveyard to play under your control. So much value out of that. You play the thing, you get value. You attack with it, you get value. Super strong first ability. But like in an infomercial, but wait, there's more. At the beginning of your turn, convert X gems to green. X is 2 times the number of lands you control, including their reinforcements. Oh man, guys, this Tortois is going to be converting so many gems to green, especially if you factor in that it's going to be bringing things back, creatures and lands from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is 2 times the number that you have, including the reinforcements. This is going to get wacky real fast. It's going to get you free stuff from the graveyard. It's going to get you free stuff in terms of playing cards from your hand. And then it's also going to make it so that when a land creature enters the battlefield under your control or is reinforced, it gets +1/+1. This bottom ability really isn't super great, but it's going to pair interestingly with the new Wrenn. I know I mentioned Wrenn on the previous adventure card, but Blossoming Tortois seems like it is match made in heaven for Wrenn. It's like they were made to be together. This card is going to be good regardless of whether or not you put it in Wrenn. Just the utility that you get from this is going to be so strong in events. It's going to be a pain because you have to get rid of this thing instead of maybe getting rid of the bomb that the Tortois brings back. And then even if you do wind up blowing up the Tortois, it's just giving you lands, and it also is converting gems. So this just seems like an incredibly powerful card. This card to me is a 1A card. It's a card that I will absolutely be chasing for and keeping my eyes out for. I very much want this card. The next card on the list, Arietti of the Charmed Apple, is the first exclusive that's going to be out. So it's going to be a card that's available for purchase. There is an alternate art. We don't necessarily know how that's going to work for the set, but we can guess that maybe it's going to be something you can get from Fiblethet. This is 10 mana for a 2/4, and has when an aura card enters the board or enters your graveyard, the first opposing creature without can't attack permanently gains can't attack. And then at the end of your turn, your opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is equal to the number of creatures with can't attack your opponent controls, including their reinforcements. So this card is really, really good to me because of the amount of control that you can exert on your opponent's side of the battlefield just by having this card down. If you wind up running this in a Liliana deck where you are discarding cards or where you're destroying cards from the top of your library, you could choose to discard auras and then start just giving all of your opponent's creatures can't attack. And then once they all have can't attack, they're kind of probably just going to be stuck there on the board doing nothing. If you've ever had a board full of Sigarda's Imprisonment creatures or Sleep with the Fishes creatures, you know exactly why this here is going to be a very powerful ability. But not only does it do this, but it also winds up killing the person that it does that to. And so if it winds up giving can't attack to a token stack, then that's just like a mega yikes, right? Like imagine Puzzle Master's a Johnny that's going to be bringing down those little kitty tokens at the beginning of the game, and they're going to get a little stack of those kitty tokens, and then this thing comes down and the kitty token stack gets can't attack, and now that kitty token stack is going to turn into Death Incarnate for a Johnny. So this card looks like a card that will definitely be worth getting your hands on. I am hoping to be able to test it out on my channel, so if you want to see it before you consider getting it yourself, or you want to wait for it to come out from Fiblethet, or even if you just want to wait until you're able to get it from Booster Crafting or something like that, that's totally fine. This doesn't look like a card where it's like you're going to be doomed if you don't have it, kind of like, Barl of Old or something like that, Eidolon of Blossoms or one of those ridiculous cards. But nonetheless, it still looks like it will be a very powerful card. So if you do choose to get it, I could definitely see there being a lot of decks that you would want to throw this into, especially in events. Next card up, Moonshaker Cavalry. This card is insanely strong. It's 18 mana for a 6/6 flyer, and has when this creature enters the battlefield, reinforce each creature you control one time. Then your creatures get a permanent +X/+X buff and flying, where X is the number of creatures you control total, including their reinforcements. So this is just absolutely nutty. Not only are you going to be reinforcing all of your creatures and giving them flying, but you're also going to be giving them an additional power buff. This is going to work really well with really high power creatures because by reinforcing them, you're going to give them a ton of power, or even with really low power creatures that you're going to be reinforcing a lot like tokens, because the power boost that this thing is going to give is going to be to all of your creatures based on the number of creatures you control, including reinforcements. So really, this is going to work in any kind of creature deck, big or small, and be very powerful. This is one of the higher chase cards on my list for me, and I think that you definitely will want to make sure that you're targeting it as well. The amount of power that this creature has is just absolutely nutty to me. It's really, really, really strong. Next card on the list is Realm Scorcher Hellkite. This dragon is 14 mana for a 4/6. It's got flying, haste, and bargain, so you can sacrifice a support to get the bonus effect. The bonus effect for sacrificing the support is going to convert 8 gems to red. That in and of itself is actually pretty solid, but then you look at the bottom effect of this dragon, which reads whenever you match red gems, doesn't say by swap, so just any match, deal 2 damage to the first opposing creature, and if you can't, deal 2 damage to your opponent, Planeswalker. So if you have the new Koth Vanguard, this thing with that Koth Vanguard, by converting the gems and then just having all of this, is going to wreak havoc on your opponent. You're going to wind up destroying them real fast from all that damage. But if you just run this with red gem conversion, if you run it with Koth, or really with just any of the red walkers that are going to convert gems, you're going to wind up being able to destroy your opponent's creatures by just having this thing on the battlefield. And because it's damage to the first opposing creature, it will bypass things like Hexproof. The one sort of downside to this card is things like Phyrexian Vindicator and the whole bunch of the prevent damage critters that we've been seeing pop up lately. So if you do make a deck around this, you do want to make sure that you have some kind of removal. This is a 1B sort of card, so it's not a card that I feel like you absolutely have to have. For me, it's a card that I really want. It's closer to 1A for me personally, but that's just because I love playing with Koth. So it's not as strong as some of the other cards that I pointed out, but nonetheless, it still looks like it'll be really good. This brings us to the virtues. There's a virtue for every single color. I don't think I put all of the virtues on my chase list. I think the red one was pretty bad, but all the other ones are pretty good. So blue, white, green, and black are solid. Red, bad. So blue virtue is kind of like the most recent Elish that makes it so that when you play something, you get 2 copies of it at first. So when you cast a creature, if it does not have the knowledge emblem, you're going to create a copy of that creature in your hand. That creature is going to be a 0/1, and it's going to get full mana with the knowledge emblem. So basically, let's say that you cast a creature, it doesn't have the knowledge emblem. You're going to cast that creature, you're going to immediately get a copy of that creature in your hand, and then you're going to play that copy. And that copy is going to come in, it's going to reinforce the first creature, and it's going to increase that creature's power toughness by 0/1. It doesn't make it so that all future copies are 0/1s, it just makes it so that that copy is a 0/1. But the really powerful part of this is it makes it so that if you've got cards with an enter the battlefield effect, then you're going to be getting those enter the battlefield effects twice. If it's an on-cast effect, you're still going to get that twice because you're giving a copy of it full mana. So double cards is always good, but the bottom of this just solidifies its role as a very phenomenal card. So when you cast a support card, if it doesn't have the knowledge emblem, create a copy of that card in your hand and give it full mana. So this is particularly nasty with Vanguards because it means that Vanguards are going to come down with double shields, which means that Teferi Vanguard is going to immediately be coming down with 8, which is going to get you pretty close to that required amount to be able to use the -8 and draw cards and turn him into an exile monster. For Tamio, it puts her down at 8, I believe, which is higher than the 7 required to give full mana to all cards in your hand every single time your turn starts. For the rare Koth, it's going to boost him to 8, which boosts him over the 7 required to make it so that red gems start killing your opponent. So there's just a lot of wacky stuff that can happen with Vanguards with this card. There's a lot of wacky stuff that can happen with creatures with this card, so it seems like it's a very good card. It also benefits from having a pretty solid flip side ability as a spell. The spell part of this card is just the basic effect of the support, which is going to create a copy of target creature you control in your hand and give that copy the knowledge emblem and full mana. Something kind of cool that you can do with this card is you can use the Vantress Visions to create a copy of a critter and give it full mana, and then cast that card, right? And then you just immediately get the cast. Unfortunately, it's not as cool in the sense that it comes to your hand with full mana, and then you can't play this necessarily. You know, you'd have to have it really wacky. You could have basically you play the spell and a support on the same turn, and then like a creature below it, but it's just really convoluted. So nonetheless, having a spell that's just going to create a copy and just give you full mana, super, super solid. Honestly, I'd probably just play the support version first, but whatever, they're both good. White one, Virtue of Loyalty. So this one is 19 mana. At the end of your turn, your creatures get +1/+1. Then creatures you control get an additional +1/+1 for each of their reinforcements. Those +1/+1s are all permanent. And then your creatures gain vigilance until the beginning of your next turn. Finally, your creatures with stun counter lose stun counter 1. So there's a bunch of cards in the set that are going to add stun counter. Makes me think that as we go forward, we might wind up seeing more cards with stun counter. So this is just going to make it so that your cards are going to be harder to stun. But nonetheless, making it so that your creatures power up every single turn could make this a really powerful card to put in a token deck. There are a lot of cards in this set that are really powerful to put into token decks. Puzzle Master Ajani just passively makes tokens, which makes this always good with Puzzle Masters Ajani because those little kitties are going to get pretty nasty real fast. So definitely a cool card. The flip side of this is not good. You're going to make a 2/2 Knight token, which is useless, basically. But the 19 mana side looks very, very good. So this is a card that I'm looking out for. I should add that Virtue of Knowledge and Virtue of Loyalty are both sort of like between 1A and 1B. It's one of those things where I'm going to have to see them played. I don't feel like I need them day one, but they're cards that I definitely want to make sure that I get my hands on. Virtue of Persistence is the black virtue. It's 18 mana. It's going to make it so that at the beginning of your turn, you're going to pick one of the first 4 creatures from your graveyard and bring it back to the battlefield under your control. I really like playing Liliana of Throw all your cards from your library into your graveyard, which means that this is just going to be a whole bunch of free real estate on the board for me, and I like that. But to each their own. This is very much a 1B sort of card because the effect is really, really good. It's going to be really annoying to go against because if you wind up getting rid of your opponent's creatures, unless you're exiling them, they're just going to keep coming back. The spell side of this is not good. At the end, until end of turn, target creature gets -3/-3, and then an additional -3/-3 for each of their reinforcements. You also gain 6 life. This is really only going to be good to remove tokens with a low base power toughness that wind up stacking up pretty high. But most of the things that people play are going to have more than 3 power toughness, so it's probably not going to kill them. It'll kill some things, but just not necessarily. It's not reliable, so I don't love the flip side. But Virtue of Persistence, definitely solid. Definitely want the card. Virtue of Strength. This is another card that's going to pair really well with the new Ren. I know that I'm mentioning new Ren a lot. I'm going to be making another video on the patch notes and the new Planeswalkers that are coming out. But this one says, at the beginning of your turn, so basically always on your own turn, increase your mana bonuses by 3 until end of turn. That's going to be the mana bonuses to everything. So green, white, blue, black, and red. That's going to be plus 15 total to your mana bonus until end of turn, which is absolutely phenomenal. Makes it so you can match more of your opponent's gems to get rid of their matches and still get a bunch for yourself. Or if you're making your own matches or you get a cascade, absolutely wild things are going to happen. Ren has an ability that boosts mana bonuses as well, so just these two together could wind up giving you just absolutely bonkers mana bonuses, which could be pretty funny to see and really terrifying to play against. The flip side of this is going to return the first creature or land support from your graveyard to your hand, and make it so the last card in your hand is a land is going to get full mana. Once again, you can pair this with the Tortois, which is going to be dumping a whole bunch of things into your graveyard to get free stuff over here, and then, of course, increase your mana bonuses, which the Tortois is going to be converting a bunch of gems and giving you lands. So both sides of this seem pretty decent. Honestly, this side seems a lot better. I'd really only play this flip side, Garen Big Growth, and if I already got the Virtue of Strength down. But you know, it's a good card. It's closer to 1A than 1B. It's still 1B for me. It's not 1A, but it's definitely a card that I want to play with. Will Scion of Peace, or like, is it just me, or does this look like who was that James Bond? Daniel Craig. This looks like Daniel Craig with an ice crown and sword, but it's just me. So this is 13 for a 2/4. It's got lifelink, vigilance, and level up, and it has when you gain life, you're going to increase this card's level by the amount of life you gained, and then at the beginning of your turn, you're going to reduce the cost of all white and blue cards in your hand by X. X is equal to this card's level, and then this card's level becomes 1. This card just reeks of insanity to me. Its cost reduction is just really, really good in strategy card games. And this thing is automatically going to make it so that all of your white and blue cards are going to be 2 less. But life gain is really, really easy to accomplish in Puzzle Quest. Really easy to accomplish. Like, I've got decks where I'm gaining like 30, 40, 50 life a turn. I mean, you just put this thing in Puzzle Masters of Johnny, right? And the enlist gems plus giving your critters lifelink. Like, you're going to be paying nothing. This thing is basically Will Scion of all the cards in your hand are free, which is entirely terrifying, especially if you're playing it in a deck that's able to just draw a whole bunch of cards. This is definitely going to be a pretty nasty enabler for what I think is going to be an infinite loop deck that's going to be pretty prominent if they don't change some of the new cards. It's one of the rares that enables it, so that'll be in another video as well. But nonetheless, this card is, to me, this is a 1A card. I think this card is going to be really, really powerful. It's a card you're going to want to put in your deck in events because it's going to give you life, and it's going to give you all the cards from your hand for less mana. So staying power and gnarly nastiness that you can do. Which brings us to the last of the Mythics and the last card in this video, which is Yenna Redtooth Regent. So Yenna is 16 for a 4/4. She's got dual color. And then activate 4 gems to create a copy of the first enchantment card in your graveyard in your hand. And then that copy is going to get full mana. And then if you control a creature with a role, target creature you control gains the royal role, then this creature here gets vigilance until the beginning of your next turn and fetch the first enchantment or spell card from your library. So basically, if you're able to get an enchantment into your graveyard and you're able to make it so you can trigger these activate gems, you could do some pretty wacky things by just getting a whole bunch of copies of enchantments, which just means that as we wind up getting more enchantments in the game that have really cool enter the battlefield triggers or things based on the amounts of shields they have or things like that, you can do some pretty wacky things. This is a 1B card for me because it's one of those cards where I'm going to have to tinker around with it before I go, oh yeah, I love this card. But at the very least, it looks pretty cool, and so it caught my eye. So that's it for my Mythics and Masterpieces. If you've got any that stood out to you that I did not address, go ahead and let me know. You can hear in the background that my son is sad that the video is ending. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.